I had always believed in the rules: work hard, be honest, follow the system, and in return, the system would protect you. That's what I told myself day after day as I juggled my demanding job at Sterling and Finch Accounting and raised my son Mason on my own. It wasn't glamorous long hours hunched over spreadsheets that blurred into a meaningless dance of numbers, a small, slightly cramped apartment that always seemed to need one more repair and takeout dinners more often than I liked to admit, but it was honest work. It was respectable. I showed up early often before the city lights had fully faded. I stayed late the last one to leave my department the scent of stale coffee, my constant companion. I never missed a deadline, never cut a corner. My work was meticulous, thorough, and I thought that mattered. I truly believed my dedication, my integrity would be my shield. Until the day it didn't. Until the day the system I'd placed my faith in turned on me with a brutal, indifferent efficiency. It was a Thursday morning, the kind where the air in the office already felt thick with unspoken tensions and looming deadlines. I was in the break room, the fluorescent lights humming aggressively overhead, pouring myself a cup of coffee that tasted suspiciously like yesterday's brew when my manager Diane Allister walked in. Her lips, usually curved in a professionally pleasant smile, were a tight, thin line. Her eyes, normally scanning for productivity, were cold, almost reptilian. "Julia," she said, her voice clipped, devoid of its usual warmth. "Can I see you in my office for a moment?" Something in her tone, a chilling formality I'd never heard before, made my stomach twist into a painful knot. A premonition, cold and sharp, pricked at the back of my neck. I nodded, setting down my cup, the coffee untouched. I followed her down the sterile beige hallway, my sensible heels clicking against the polished tile like a morbid countdown. Each step felt heavier than the last. Inside her meticulously organized office, the HR director, a woman named Trish Jenkins, was already seated. Trish, with her perfectly coiffed blonde hair and a smile that never quite reached her eyes, always made me uneasy. She avoided my gaze now, her attention feignedly absorbed in flipping through a manila folder on Diane's mahogany desk. The folder had my name on it. "Julia, we're terminating your employment effective immediately," Diane said, her voice flat, devoid of any emotion, as if she were discussing the weather or a minor office supply issue. Not the destruction of a decade-long career. I blinked. The words seemed to hang in the air, unreal, nonsensical. What? Why, my voice was a weak tremor, a pale imitation of its usual confident cadence. My mind raced, trying to find a reason, an explanation for this sudden cataclysm. "There have been concerns about your performance." Julia Trish chimed in, her voice sugary sweet, cloying, and utterly fake. She finally looked at me, a flicker of something unreadable, satisfaction, in her eyes before it was quickly masked. I stared at them, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. Concerns since when I had just received a glowing annual review less than 6 weeks ago. Diane herself had written it, praising my unwavering commitment and exceptional attention to detail. How could things change so drastically so quickly? Is this about the incident with Mr. Whitman's expense report? I asked, my voice shaking, a sickening realization dawning. Jason Whitman, a senior partner notoriously arrogant and with a reputation for creative accounting. Just last week, I had refused to sign off on his lavish, poorly documented client entertainment expenses, which included charges that looked suspiciously like a personal vacation. I had flagged it as per company policy, sending it up the chain to Diane, expecting her to back me up. She had been vague, non-committal. Diane's lips twitched a micro-expression of irritation. "Let's just say, it's a pattern of not being a team player, Julia. A failure to align with company priorities. A pattern." The blood drained from my face, leaving me cold and numb. A pattern of integrity, perhaps. A pattern of refusing to look the other way. They weren't firing me for poor performance. They were firing me because I wouldn't play their game. Because I was a threat to their comfortable, corrupt little world. I wanted to argue, to scream, to lay out my impeccable record, to defend myself against these baseless, insulting accusations. But the look on Diane's face, a mixture of steely resolve and utter disinterest, stopped me cold. This wasn't a conversation. This wasn't a misunderstanding to be cleared up. This was an execution. The decision had already been made. I was disposable. I packed my things in a daze, a heavy silence pressing in on me. My hands trembled as I carefully placed the framed photo of Mason, his 8-year-old smile bright and innocent on top of a box filled with years of my life. Files, commendations, a stupid little cactus that had somehow survived my neglect. Colleagues averted their eyes, whispering behind cupped hands as I made the walk of shame to the elevator, a security guard trailing me like I was a common criminal. They thought I'd go quietly. They thought I'd be too ashamed, too broken to fight. But they didn't know me. They didn't know the fire they had just ignited. That same afternoon, as I walked home from the bus stop, the weight of the cardboard box digging painfully into my arms, a symbol of my sudden brutal displacement, my phone rang. It was Mason's school, Northwood Elementary, the principal's voice. Mrs. Albright was sharp, condescending, dripping with a self-righteous authority that always set my teeth on edge. "Mrs. Miller, I'm calling to inform you that Mason has been disruptive in class again. He refused to stand during the Pledge of Allegiance this morning and then proceeded to make an inappropriate and disrespectful comment about our country's values when questioned by his teacher." I stopped dead in the middle of the sidewalk, the sounds of city traffic fading into a dull roar in my ears. The box slipped from my numb fingers, thudding onto the concrete. Disruptive Mason. My quiet, thoughtful, sensitive boy. That doesn't sound like Mason at all. "Mrs. Albright," I said, my voice tight, strained. "He's always been respectful." What exactly happened? "Well, Mrs. Miller," she snapped her tone, implying I was a negligent parent, perhaps if you spent less time focused on your personal issues and more time instilling proper values in your son, we wouldn't be having these problems. He needs to understand that in this country we show respect. I felt the breath leave my body as if I'd been punched. Personal issues, how dare she? The sheer audacity, the cruelty of her words on this day of all days was staggering. That night, the small apartment felt colder, emptier than usual. Mason sat at the kitchen table picking at his uneaten dinner, his head bowed low, his shoulders slumped. The vibrant spark that usually danced in his eyes was gone, replaced by a dull, wounded look. "Sweetheart," I said gently, kneeling beside him, "tell me what happened at school today. The real story." He looked up at me, his big brown eyes so like his father's, shining with unshed tears. His lower lip trembled. "We were doing the pledge," he whispered, his voice barely audible. I was just thinking, Mom, about what it means. And when Mrs. Davis asked why I wasn't standing right away, I asked if the liberty and justice for all part was for everyone. Like, really for everyone. Even for people like Abuelo in Santo Domingo, or for people who look like me. My heart ached. His innocent, profound question born of a child's pure sense of fairness. "And what did she say?" I asked, bracing myself. "She got mad. She sent me to Principal Albright's office. And Principal Albright, she yelled at me. She said, kids like me don't understand what it means to be a real American. She said my question was disrespectful and that I needed to learn my place." I clenched my fists so tightly, my nails dug into my palms, drawing blood. Kids like him. Because his father was Dominican. Because his skin was a beautiful shade of olive, a little darker than many of the other kids in his predominantly white school. Because he dared to think, to question instead of blindly conforming. That night, as Mason finally slept exhausted from his emotional ordeal, I sat in the oppressive darkness of our living room and stared at the peeling paint on the wall. My job, my son's dignity. They'd tried to take it all in one fell swoop. They thought they could crush us, silence us, make us disappear. But they didn't know what I knew. They didn't know about the folder. It wasn't just one folder. It was a meticulously organized digital archive backed up in multiple locations. A collection of emails, scanned memos, performance reviews, even a few discreetly recorded voicemails from Diane, where her instructions bordered on unethical, especially concerning Mr. Whitman's accounts. All the things they thought I was too naive, too unimportant, or too scared to keep. Evidence of their hypocrisy, their deceit, their casual cruelty. And I had a friend. A secret weapon they knew nothing about. Marcus Thorne. A quiet, unassuming lawyer who lived 2 floors down in our building. He wasn't a flashy corporate attorney. He was a man of the people, a champion for the underdog. He was the kind of guy who wore the same slightly worn brown corduroy coat every day, regardless of the season, who helped old Mrs. Henderson carry her groceries up the stairs, who knew every clause, every loophole, every precedent in employment law and civil rights litigation by heart. He had a mind like a steel trap and a passion for justice that burned quietly but fiercely. When I knocked on his door the next morning, my eyes gritty from lack of sleep, the digital folder on a thumb drive clutched in my hand, he opened it with a knowing, compassionate smile. "Julia," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "I had a feeling I'd be seeing you. Come in. I've put the kettle on." I blinked, surprised. You knew." He nodded, ushering me into his small, book-filled apartment. "I've seen it before, Julia, many times. They do this to good people, especially women, people of color. Anyone they perceive as not fitting their mold or anyone who stands up to them. They think we won't fight back. They think we'll be too intimidated, too broken." He gestured to the thumb drive. "Is that what I think it is?" I handed it to him. He plugged it into his laptop, his eyes scanning the contents, his expression growing increasingly grim, then narrowing with a lawyer's focused intensity. He read through my last glowing performance review, then an email chain where Diane subtly pressured me to be more flexible with Whitman's numbers, followed by my polite but firm refusal. After a long silence, he looked up, a spark in his eyes. "We have a case, Julia. A very strong one against Sterling and Finch for wrongful termination and retaliation. They've been careless, very careless." A wave of relief so profound it almost buckled my knees, washed over me. I wasn't alone. I wasn't crazy. "And Mason," I asked, my voice thick with emotion. "What they did to him, what Principal Albright said." Marcus's expression hardened. "That's a civil rights violation, Julia. Discrimination based on national origin and race. We can fight that too. It will be tougher. Schools are notoriously difficult, but with clear evidence of her statements and a pattern of behavior. Yes, we can fight that." That same week, fueled by a cold, controlled rage and Marcus's unwavering support, I began documenting everything about the school with the same meticulousness I'd once applied to accounting spreadsheets. I helped Mason write down in his own words every detail he could remember about the incident with Mrs. Davis and Principal Albright and any other times he'd felt singled out or uncomfortable. I started reaching out cautiously to other parents Mason had mentioned, parents of other minority children or children who were perceived as different. Some were hesitant, fearful of repercussions, but a few, like Maria Rodriguez, whose daughter had also faced similar microaggressions, shared their stories off the record, their voices hushed with frustration and anger. Their experiences painted a disturbing pattern. I attended the next PTA meeting, my small audio recorder running discreetly in my purse. I watched Principal Albright stand at the podium waxing lyrical about Northwood Elementary's commitment to diversity and inclusion, her smile plastered on her words, a hollow mockery of the reality my son and others had experienced. The hypocrisy was nauseating, but the recording was golden. And then, when Marcus confirmed we had built 2 ironclad cases, when every piece of evidence was cross-referenced and every statement corroborated, I struck. 2 lawsuits filed simultaneously, one against Sterling and Finch, accounting for wrongful termination retaliation and creating a hostile work environment, one against the Northwood Elementary School District and Principal Albright personally for discrimination, emotional distress, and violating Mason's civil rights. The news spread through my small professional circle and the local community like wildfire. The initial response from both Sterling and Finch and the school district was predictable: denial, outrage. They issued carefully worded statements painting me as a disgruntled former employee, an unstable and oversensitive parent seeking a payout. They tried to bury me under an avalanche of legal jargon and character assassination, but the evidence, as Marcus always said, spoke louder than their lies. The discovery phase for the Sterling and Finch lawsuit was brutal. Marcus was a quiet storm in the deposition room. He had Diane Allister and Trish Jenkins on the ropes, their carefully constructed narrative of my poor performance crumbling under the weight of my stellar reviews and the incriminating emails they thought I hadn't kept. Mr. Whitman himself was deposed, and under Marcus's relentless, precise questioning, he inadvertently revealed the pressure he'd put on Diane to deal with the Julia problem after I'd flagged his fraudulent expenses. The company's lawyers, initially arrogant and dismissive, started to look uneasy. They made a lowball settlement offer. Marcus, after consulting with me, politely declined. We weren't just after money, we were after accountability. The school lawsuit was even more emotionally charged. Principal Albright in her deposition was arrogant and defensive, doubling down on her assertion that Mason had been disruptive and disrespectful. She tried to twist his innocent question into an act of deliberate provocation. But her carefully crafted facade began to crack when Marcus presented her with the PTA meeting recording her own voice proclaiming a commitment to values she clearly didn't practice. Mason also had to give a deposition. It was the hardest day of my life watching my small son, his voice sometimes trembling, but his eyes clear and honest, recount his humiliation to a room full of stony-faced lawyers. Marcus was brilliant, gentle, but firm, ensuring Mason felt safe and heard. And Mason was incredible. He told his truth simply and powerfully. Several other parents, emboldened by my lawsuit, came forward with affidavits detailing their own children's similar experiences with Principal Albright, establishing a clear pattern of discriminatory behavior. The school district's lawyers, realizing the public relations nightmare unfolding, began to signal a willingness to talk. The day we walked into the courtroom for the final hearing on the school case, Sterling and Finch had opted for a very generous out-of-court settlement just days before, unwilling to risk a public trial with the evidence Marcus had amassed. Mason held my hand, his small fingers gripping mine tightly. He wasn't just my son at that moment. He was my partner in this fight, my courage, my reason. And as the judge, a stern-faced woman with kind eyes, read her ruling, finding in our favor, awarding us significant damages for emotional distress, ordering a formal public apology from the school district and Principal Albright, and mandating comprehensive anti-discrimination training for all Northwood Elementary staff. I looked at Mason. A small, hesitant smile touched his lips, and his eyes, for the first time in months, held that old, familiar spark. Principal Albright was subsequently reassigned to an administrative position with no student contact pending completion of her mandated training. Sterling and Finch issued a carefully worded internal memo about upholding ethical standards. And though Diane and Trish kept their jobs, their reputations within the firm were irrevocably damaged. We weren't just surviving, we were winning. Because you don't silence a mother's fury. You don't dismiss her pain or underestimate her resolve. You fuel it, you sharpen it, and when that fury born of love and a fierce demand for justice finally burns, it burns away the rot, clears the path, and makes space for something new, something better to grow. They thought they had buried us, dismissed us as nobodies, but they didn't know. We were seeds, and this victory, this hard-won justice was just the beginning of our bloom.